Mm.
All right, everyone. We are on episode 16 of the Conquer the Mind podcast. I am very excited for today's episode with Jamie of Resting Rainbow. We're going to change it up very much similar to the episode last week, episode 15 with Ron Bender. We really got some experts in franchise development. So we're really going to tailor this to potential candidates, people interested in franchising, people interested in business ownership, people just overall contemplating maybe those next steps in their career. We're going to help you understand, is business ownership, is franchising right for you? And then help you understand what the process looks like, what the education process looks like, and help you understand how it is really about awarding franchises, not selling franchises. So, Jamie, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited.
Thank you for having me, Josh. I appreciate it. And I love the topic. It's something I like to talk about a lot, actually, whether it's with other candidates or other peers of mine that are just getting into franchise development and understanding best practices, etc. So it's a great topic. Thank you.
Awesome. And I know I'm going to briefly just kind of go through your background as well. We'll probably need a whole nother podcast episode to really dive into your background, which is really exciting as well. Joining a bunch of organizations, really promoting franchising and really healthy growth of franchising as well, which is really exciting. So Jamie started off in 2007 in the franchise industry and hasn't looked back since, as we kind of know, as people in the franchising industry, you fall in and you just never look back is kind of the joke for everyone. So she's a lifer, as she says. She's worked for two franchise suppliers to really help learn the business when she first started. So one helped her learn the industry and the other was more on the operational side of franchising, which is very exciting as well. So maybe we'll be able to dive into that a little bit as well. So she has over a decade of franchise development experience. And today she is joining us as the Vice President of Franchise Development at Resting Rainbow Pet Memorial's Cremation franchise, which may be sounding a little doom and gloom, but we're going to dive into everything about the opportunity, the education process, and that's the introduction, everyone. I'm very excited to dive in, Jamie.
Very good, Josh. Thank you so much for that. I am definitely a lifer. I can't see myself leaving franchising ever. I might eventually become a franchisee of the right model when I find it. And actually, Resting Rainbow has got me itching, actually. But yes, and most people know me, and they know that I change my hairstyle often. Um, every podcast it looks a tad different. But one thing you may not know, a little fun fact, is I have an identical twin sister and I have an art degree. So, coupled with never wanting to look like my identical twin sister and having that creative side, I change my appearance a lot.
No, that's too funny. Your identical sister, is she in the business world at all, or are you guys
She's
similar at all, or very different paths?
We are, there's a lot of similarities and then non-similarities, but she is in sales as well, but she
Okay.
does insurance sales and she is ranked very high in the insurance world. She one actually not too a couple of years ago, one of my bosses actually tried to recruit her, and I was like, no, because we are very competitive. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I will leave. And they were just, my sister immediately said no, but they got me going with it and were teasing me. So, yeah.
That's too funny. It's always interesting to see the directions that, people growing up in the same environment go, let alone twins in the same household, the same similar genetics. So that's very interesting. And one of the things you
Yeah.
mentioned there is competitive competition. Excuse me, I guess I'm having trouble speaking right now. But basically, that's kind of one of the traits that I think is really good for a potential franchise owner. So kind of starting off before people even start the education process, before potentially meeting with a broker or franchise developer, whatever path they may go, it really starts off with kind of the mindset and thinking of, as you kind of alluded to in previous episodes, what your why is, why business ownership. So how does someone even start to figure out if business ownership is right for them? Figuring out your why is one of the hardest things in life. So how do you kind of figure out, if you're meant to be a business owner?
A lot of it has to do with their risk adversity up
Mm,
front. They've got to really look at that risk adversity and say, do they have the gumption to do it? I always tell people, have a conversation with yourself in the mirror and say, can I do it? Do I want to do it? And if they're saying yes, 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 then that's all good signs. If their answers are no, 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 then their risk adversity is too
mm,
high. And then there's different brands and models that will go with certain risk adversity, right? With an emerging brand such as Resting Rainbow, we need early adopters.
yeah,
So somebody that is super high risk need not apply because it's just not going to work. I also encourage people to be really smart about their financial picture, right? I
mm,
think there's three major reasons why franchisees fail in franchising. And one of the biggest is they're just not financially prepared. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to somebody that thought they're going to make 50 to $100,000 their first year. Like, nope,
mhm.
that's not going to
Yeah,
happen. It's possible, but highly unlikely in the first year. It's the hardest, right? So not only do you need to have the money to get your business up and running, but you need at least money for a year to live off of. And if you don't have
mm,
that, now's not the right time, right? So timing is really
yeah.
everything as well. So those are the two big ones, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a really, really, really great point. I think that's one of the biggest fallacies in franchising, where it's, I throw a few 100,000 at something and I make $500,000 year one and I do little work and just kind of watch my money grow year after year. But, if that were the case, a lot of people
I'd
would
be
be doing
doing it.
that. Yeah, exactly. Everyone would be doing it. But
Yeah.
it requires, that year one ramp up of the business to be able to reap the benefits in year three, year four, year five, where you're just simply operating the business, watching it grow, which, that's what people kind of picture, but they don't see that first 6, 12, 24 months where they are doing the heavy lifting. So I think that's a really great point. So as people, they're evaluating franchise opportunities, one of the things that people, they do some research. A lot of times people come in thinking the McDonald's, the Subway, kind of the big food restaurants. How does someone kind of figure out, which opportunity between, a lot of people want to be passionate about what they're doing, but then, there's a lot of good home service options. There's senior care where you can be passionate. How do you kind of figure out, do I want to be passionate about it? Do I want to, focus more on the profit aspect? How do you kind of combine what you're looking for with the passion, with the profit, and kind of navigating those different avenues?
Yeah, I think there's multiple different types of candidates. I was in senior care with Home Watch caregivers for 6 years on that brand, and I was able to accurately match people who have that passion and want to be part of a community and really feel good about what they're doing. But also, they had great item 19, so it worked
Mhm.
out really well. But it's not a fast ramp up, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got to create trust and respect in the community. But then there's like with this brand, I'm working with a lot of candidates that are really savvy financially and have multiple other businesses. For instance, I'm working with multiple people who have Amazon dealerships and are other franchisees of other systems. And when they
Yeah.
see this, they're like, oh, I can feel good about the community side of it. But it's such a simple model
Yeah.
where they can be semi-absentee and only have 2 to 3 employees, and the EBITDA margins are huge. They're just like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have over 100 employees. Yeah, I'm interested, right?
Yeah.
So it really has a lot to do with the client and whether that brand requires it, right? So, for instance, when I was on another pet care brand, you know, the original owners and the leadership team truly believed you have to have a passion for animals. And if the person said, no, I don't, they didn't want to talk to them anymore, right? They didn't want them in the system.
Yeah.
So I think that has a lot to do with a combination of the candidate, but also what does the brand want from a candidate, right? So it's going to differ from brand to brand and client to client. So
Yeah.
with this brand, there's a little bit more wiggle room in that perspective.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful and kind of leading into one of my next questions as you're kind of talking about candidates, they're trying to combine passion, profit, their characteristics, their lifestyle with all these different businesses. And, as you know, and I know, there's thousands and thousands of opportunities. And as these candidates start to do some internet research, they also start to realize there's thousands and thousands of opportunities outside of the McDonald's, the Subway. So as people do start the process, well, excuse me, it starts with a bunch of different ways. Either, like I said, the internet research, they could go directly to a franchise, fill out an internet form, or they could meet with a broker. How does someone then navigate all those different routes? And, they're probably getting message, text on all these different automations. How does someone kind of figure out what that initial step would be? Because, they have all these questions, but, they don't even know who all these people are reaching out to them. So what would you advise to someone in that situation, kind of just getting started?
Yeah, because if they filled out a form online, they're probably getting inundated by a bunch of different companies and stuff. And I think a lot of candidates will just like, no, I'm out, and they'll walk away, right? My personal opinion is I love it more when they're working with consultants like you, Josh.
Mm,
I'm because you and other great consultants will actually educate them
mhm,
and give them more direction and help them understand, the do's and don'ts.
mhm,
At the end of the day, each brand is going to provide a certain lifestyle or outcome. Certain brands will only ever make this much money. Certain brands will give you more opportunity and stuff like that. So working with somebody like yourself, which is a coach or broker, a consultant, whatever name they go by, help the
mhm.
good ones
Yeah.
help them understand their why. Going back to what we started with, what's your why? What are you trying to accomplish out of being a business owner? Is it to have a better work-life balance? If that's the case, we're going to cross off all these franchises over here because they are not going to give you work-life balance, right? You have a young child, okay, you need something over in this space, right? Or if you're trying to be owner operator and you want to make X amount of dollars, like, okay, so this group over here is going to fit the, so it's that matchmaking piece of it. But you have to again start with the why and understand what you want. Some people don't want a lot of employees. Some people love having a team of employees. So
Yeah.
strategizing over what those items are for the why, and then narrowing down that huge list to that little tiny funnel is really the best place to start, in my opinion.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's
Josh,
super.
I want to point out, I don't know if everybody's noticed, but Josh and I both talk with our hands because we're both Frenchies and from New England. I was noticing this. You were both doing this.
No, if you
Right.
watch my father on any calls, his hand motions and gestures are the exact same that I do. So it's very funny. We were just at the holidays and we'll literally just be like watching a sports game and my mom and sister just start laughing and we don't know why. And it's because like my dad and I will like scratch our back at like the same time or do like these little things at like the same time. It's really weird.
It's hysterical. I love it.
But I think that's super helpful. And one good point you brought up is, there's good brokers, there's bad brokers. Same thing with franchise developers. It goes both ways. So how does a candidate, if they decide meeting with a broker, help them align their goals with that franchise opportunity? What are some questions they should be asking a broker? How do they start to figure out if this is a good broker? Maybe it's someone that's just out for the commission, out for the lifestyle, or someone that's really kind of passionate about franchising.
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with the time that they're willing to invest in
Mhm.
that candidate, right? So when what you're probably too young, Josh, but there's a gentleman, rest in peace, Mark Kickenap, who I met early on in my franchise career. And he mentioned when you talk to a candidate for the first time, if you don't get off the phone knowing how many kids they have, what's their ages, what's their names, do they have a dog, do they have a cat, what's the cat and dog's name, if you don't get off the phone and have these personal conversations where what's the spouse name, what do they do, how long
Yeah.
have they been married for, you've got to get into the personal stuff to understand the person as a whole.
Mm.
So I think that's one of the first indicators, is that consultant or broker actually investing time into you?
Mhm.
And not going straight for the wallet, right?
Yeah.
Helping them educate them and help them feel comfortable, right? I
Mhm.
hate salesy stuff. I hate it. I am a salesperson, but
Yeah.
I am a say it like it is, no sugarcoat. Maybe that's the Northeasterner in me, but just say it like it is. Like this is what it's
Yeah.
going to look like, and be very upfront, transparent, and let them know that I'm here to help you. But a
Mhm.
good broker, consultant, franchise development manager are also going to put a process in place to follow. And
Mhm.
if that consultant is not, or FDM is not putting a process in place, that, in my opinion, is a big yellow or red flag, right?
Yeah.
They should have a process in place. That's why they're coming to you to begin with, right? And
Mhm.
if they're going into, if they're working with somebody like me, if there's no process in place, well, that again should be a yellow or red flag, because that's what franchising is, right? It's following a
Yeah.
process. And you're too young. My guess is you don't have children, but children need structure, and so do candidates. Candidates need structure, and they need homework assignments. Early on in my franchise development side of my career, Tom Wood from Floor Coverings International, he was a great mentor for me, and he made it very clear. It's like, don't believe what people say, believe in their actions, right? So they can say blah 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 blah, but if they don't actually do what they say they're going to do, then they're useless, right? So
Mhm.
that's one of the things I think a broker as well as
Yeah.
myself, we have to give people homework. So if a candidate's coming to a broker and consultant, and they're not getting to know them, they're not investing time, they're not providing a process, then I think you need to find a better broker.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I agreed, and there's thousands of them out there, so, that's a really good point, bunch of good points, and, you mentioned the word process, broker having a process in place, and, when they meet with the franchise developer, which we're gonna talk about, there's a process in place, and franchising is all about franchise owners following that process because the founders, the CEO, they have years, if not decades of experience learning the ins and outs, the challenges of the business to really perfect the business so that you can really grow and scale that business. And then once you have reached to a point where you have followed the system, then they're obviously it is a two-way partnership where they're looking for new ideas, but they're not looking for you to just buy that investment, buy that franchise, get the brand, then reinvent the wheel because the wheel has been invented over years, decades for a reason. So I think that's a good point. And if a candidate can't follow the process for a broker, for a franchise developer, we're going to learn it's a two-way interview process. So that's going to be a red flag right away for anyone to want to work with them or want to award a franchise to them. And another thing that you mentioned is sales. And as we're going to learn right now into the next call is franchising is really about awarding rather than sales, because the worst thing any franchise can do is really sell territory to someone that isn't motivated. They don't want to grow and scale a business. So they meet with the broker. I say resting rainbow. I think you could be an interested candidate. I introduce them to you, Jamie. What does that initial call look like with a candidate? What are some things that they should be thinking about? What does that look like? And I think we kind of joke, a lot of people, they want the numbers, they want the financials. How much money am I going to make in that first 5 minutes? But obviously, that's not necessarily the point of the call.
So I do things probably a little bit different than most. I'm a firm believer of providing quite a bit of information up front before I even have a call. So I have a introduction webinar that I've created and recorded and have on Vimeo. So
Yeah.
before we even talk, I'm sending out this 13-minute video, and it does put a splash of the item 19 in there just to wet their whistle, because they do want that information. So
Yep.
it really just kind of, I call it the why resting rainbow. I did it for home watch caregivers. I did it for woofies. I will do it for every brand I ever represent, where it's just talking about the who, the what, the why, right? And
Yeah.
a splash of item 19 data, just to get them understanding of, why it started, what's the general offering, etc. So on our first phone call, hopefully they have watched it, and most of the time they have, not everybody. And I don't chastise them if they don't. Just say, hey, you got more homework because I'm going to send you 2 more webinars. But I asked them to tell me more about themselves from a personal standpoint. In most cases, I don't get too far into the professional because I've already gotten that from you, the consultant, right? But they may touch on it or whatnot. But I want to hear more about the personal. Tell me about your kids. Tell me about your family, those types of things. Tell me what you're trying to achieve. What's your why? And I literally ask them, what is your why? Why do you want to do something like this? And then from there, I tell them a little bit about myself very briefly, and so they know who they're working with. And then I said, "What are your initial questions?"
Mm,
And usually they only have a couple, and
yeah,
sometimes they'll go off the deep end and want to go right into the financials and stuff. And I just say, "Hey, great news is our next call. We're going to go over the item 19. I have a very in-depth item 19, but before we do that, we need to cover the educational stuff first." And then I send them 2 additional webinars, one about marketing and real estate, and the others operations, technology, that type of stuff. So
yeah.
I'm always giving them homework. And it's fun. The first call is usually pretty exciting. And I'm usually able to tell after the very first call whether they're a potential franchisee or not.
Oh, wow. That's impressive.
Yes.
Can you like expand upon that a little bit? Is there like certain triggers, traits, characteristics where as someone potentially, obviously no one has to make any investment. No one, like I said, no one's asking you to buy a business on day one or even day 30, but you mentioned homework and, it makes me think of high school and I hated homework. But, it obviously is some sort of time investment. So people want to start to think, should I even go forth with the education process? So what are some of those things where right away you're like, franchising is not for you necessarily?
First of all, did they show up for the call?
Yeah.
And that's a big one, right? Did
Yeah.
they show up, or if they were going to be late or had to reschedule, they give you notice, right? I
Yeah.
recently just had a candidate no show 2 times in a row, and I was like, okay, here we go. Did they do the homework? Now on call one, I don't put too much emphasis on that because I hadn't communicated yet to them about my stance on doing the homework. So I don't put too much emphasis on that, but
Mm.
how are they turning on the camera? I like the
Yeah.
eye contact. And when they're on camera, are they doing this? And not actually paying attention. So I'll give you an example of a very recent candidate actually, who I knew right off of the bat was never going to be a buyer of anything in franchising, in my opinion. Young man, um, very done very, very well for himself, actually out of our area, the New England, Boston area,
Yeah.
and in a YPO. So he's done financially incredibly well.
Mm.
And he just wants to go straight to numbers, straight to numbers. He will not give me any personal information. And I, no matter how I redirect it, no. And
Mm.
I was like, I think it's possible that you're too entrepreneurial for
Mm.
franchising. And like, what do you mean? I was like, you've built multiple companies already. So why are you interested in franchising? You
Mm.
can do this by yourself. Why do you need us? And he's like, I don't need you. Okay, great. Why are we talking?
Yeah.
But it's just calling it out, right? It's calling a spade a spade. So those are the things when people are, you can easily tell when people are super risk adverse because they're scared out of their minds, and you can see it, you can hear it, you can feel it. That people are, uh, that will only focus on the numbers, when they won't turn on their camera. I had a guy recently who wouldn't turn on his camera, and he told me he was laying in bed. We did not have a second phone call. Okay. Like,
Yeah.
okay, you're obviously not taking this serious, right?
Yeah.
But then the ones that are great are the ones that are very engaged
Mm.
and they're asking excellent questions.
Yeah.
And they're serious, but not too serious. Does that make sense?
No,
It's
yeah.
pretty obvious, I think.
Yeah, that's funny because I'm really the same way. Most people in really franchising will are fine just doing phone calls. But I'm very big on Zoom seeing your face, especially if they're making one of the biggest investments of their future, of their life with their family. I want to see your face, and you can really better understand based upon their facial expressions. And like you said, if someone's laying in bed or, they're doing 20 different things, it's hard to figure out, how serious they are about franchising and business ownership. And another good point that you brought up is, the candidate that you mentioned, he had already started a bunch of different businesses. And I think what's important is you kind of told him, you're too entrepreneurial for franchising. A lot of, with franchising, like we mentioned, it's not about sales. We're not looking to change your mind and convince you that franchising is for you. It's really just if you are considering business ownership, and then you're not in that kind of top 0.1% that is capable of doing it yourself, crafting and scaling this own business and starting all these systems, then we have this education, this discovery process in place for you that is so powerful. So we've kind of mentioned the introduction call. They'll get to know you, you're going to get to know them. And then you hinted at, the FDD, the unit economics, which is kind of the next step and something that every candidate's kind of looking for. And I'm sure in your experience, you've evaluated a lot of FDDs. You've probably seen good ones, some bad ones. What are kind of some things that people should start to look at? Obviously, right away, they just want to figure out what is my annual income going to look like? But, is there things that could be misleading sometimes, things that people should be looking for in, a healthy FDD, if that makes sense?
I love this question. So, at the end of the day, we don't have a crystal ball to determine whether these people are going to be good or not, right? So all we can do is see how this process goes and put little checks in place to
Mhm.
see how they do. And sometimes it's homework, and sometimes it's just asking them crazy questions to see how they respond, believe it or not, right? And I have, I call them little tests the whole way through. But so my second call, they have watched two webinars, and I asked them straight up, "Did you watch the webinars?" Yes. Great. What were your thoughts, questions, concerns? Now, this is gonna this upsets some people. If they say no, I say, "Great, let's reschedule the call."
Mhm.
How they respond to that tells me so much, right? If
Yeah.
they're like, "I'm sorry, I take ownership and responsibility. You're absolutely right. Let's reschedule." I love that. They owned it. They made a mistake. They owned it. If they're like, "No, I want to do this now." Sorry, and they're very rude about it. That's a huge red flag, or at least a yellow flag, right?
Mhm.
So if they did, though, the next second call is me doing an FDD review. And one of the things I learned from Peter Barkman, actually, over at Brand Wine years ago, was never just send the FDD. This was early in my friend Dev career. He's like, always walk people through it, because very few FDMs are actually doing that. And when I did that, it was a huge game changer. So I created, and I love to do everything fun and joking. Let's always laugh. Like laughter is always the best medicine. And so I joke with people. I was like, "Hey, you're dating Resting Rainbow right now, and probably some other franchises. And if you decide to invest, it's like a short term marriage with a way better exit strategy."
Yeah.
So, getting a copy of the FDD is like being invited to the family barbecue. It's your first glimpse at the family. Now, when you go meet the family for the first time, do you need to meet everybody?
Mhm.
No, you need to meet the parents, the grandparents, and siblings. So I'm going to show you where those are in this FDD. But if you start getting that gut feeling, it's time to pop the question. It's really important to read this thing cover to cover. Now,
Mhm.
you can still read it cover to cover right away, but it is a legal document and it can be overwhelming. So then I just walk them kind of through items 1 through 23 and the exhibits. And I always straight out say right away, the most important thing, in my opinion, here is the franchise agreement, because most franchisors are not going to negotiate this. You've got to set expectations immediately, right? Read it right away, because if you don't like what you see there, there's some deal breakers. Ask questions, because if you don't like the answers, you're going to want to just walk away, because it is highly unlikely a franchisor is going to negotiate that. And if they are willing to negotiate it, that's another flag to consider.
Yeah.
Like, are they that desperate that they need to sell a franchise that they're willing to negotiate this?
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Mhm.
So I walk them through items 1 through 4 is the appetizer, 5, 6, and 7 are the meat and potatoes. I explain
Yeah.
all of them. 8 through 18 are the vegetables. They're healthy and nutritious, and you should eat them. But hey, you're an adult and you're at a barbecue. Let's go straight to the dessert table, which is item 19. So I
Yeah.
have a goofy little thing, and I walk them through that before I send them to the FDD. So that's a lot of times, like, people like, "Send me the FDD." Nope, not until I go through not until I walk you through it,
Mm.
and then I'll send the FDD, and that is a huge, huge game changer, and I ask people it's crazy, Josh. I'll ask them, "Have you seen an FDD before?" "Yeah, I have." "Great. Did anybody walk you through, or did you just get sent to you?" 9 times out of 10, "Oh, no, they just sent it to me." "Oh, great. Did you understand it?" "Oh, no, I'm so confused," they say, so going through it and actually giving some education and pointing out little things. And I point out stuff like what to look for in other people's FDDs.
Yeah.
Those are like little ways that you can do little digs, but like professional digs of like, hey, look out here
Right.
for these types of things. So it's not just about benefiting me for my FDD, but helping to educate them when they look at any FDD.
Mm. Yeah, I think you brought up some really great points, and communication is so key. Whether a candidate is speaking to a franchise developer or someone like myself as a broker, and I ask that question a lot. Are you familiar with an FDD? And they kind of like shrug, and then they're almost embarrassed to say no, so then they say yes. But they're doing themselves an injustice because we're all here to explain it, be a resource for you. So the more communication, the more honest feedback, the better we can better represent you. And it might not be, this opportunity, it may be a different opportunity, but allowing you to educate yourself so that you can make that decision. And one of the things you mentioned is kind of the different generations between the grandkids, the parents, and then the younger kids. And between the three generations, that kind of made my mind think about the validation process where you kind of want to compare the top 25%, the middle 25%, then the bottom 25%. And I'm not saying kids are the bottom 25%. I was just thinking the three groups that you saw, and I was thinking making that comparison. So I just want to be clear. I like kids and parents too. But basically, you want to make those comparisons between, you have the FDD, you're going to see all the financials, then you're going to go into that validation process. And just kind of speaking upon that, where you're going to get the opportunity to validate the opportunity, speak to the other franchise owners in your market, and really see if that opportunity makes sense. So, how much emphasis do you place in terms of, everyone wants to think about what their earning potential is? How much emphasis would you place on the FDD review versus kind of the validation, kind of weighing that opportunity set, if that makes sense?
Yeah, now working on 2 emerging brands,
Yeah.
as Resting Rainbow and Woofie's compared to Meineke Car Care and Home Wash
Yeah.
Caregivers that are, 40-year-old brands and had tons of validation.
Mm.
I've changed my opinion, actually. So with Meineke and Home Watch Caregivers, I had lots of validators, and one of the best things that any franchise development person can do is get to know their franchisees, create a relationship, because they don't necessarily want to do validation calls, but if they like you, they're happy to do so, right?
Mm.
So that's just a little tidbit for any new FDM or franchise development person. Like, you've got to get to know those franchisees and build relationships with them. But
Yeah.
then on the side with an emerging brand, there's really nobody to talk to. Resting Rainbow doesn't. And that's again where it goes into the early adopter type of thing. You've got to find somebody that doesn't need validation.
Yeah.
But if I take the 2 swings, right, I've got tons of validators to absolutely no validators, right?
Yeah.
How important is validation? And I think a lot of that has to do with the risk adversity again of the candidate. I've
Mm.
had many, many candidates that don't even care to talk to a single franchisee because they're strong enough on their own convictions that they're going to succeed no matter what,
Mm.
right? The candidates that are more risk adverse want to do more validation, but
Mm.
it's all about helping them understand what they're going to get out of it, right? And one of the things I always talk to other franchise development people, newer ones, is be upfront. If they're in a market that's next to a franchisee that is struggling or is not happy, just tell them, because they're gonna call them whether you like it or not. They're gonna call them. So you've got to be upfront about bad validation. Like, hey, this is why you're going to hear this. This is what we're trying to do about it to help that person, right?
Yeah,
So being very upfront and honest. So, I personally don't think people have to validate in order to invest into a franchise. Validation is a amazing tool if you can have it, but you still have to keep in the back of your mind, what can you do versus what they do, because you can't guarantee that you're going to execute the same way they're going to execute. So I encourage them to ask more questions about, if you knew now what you knew then, would you do it all over again?
yeah,
Because somebody could be calling, you could have got them on a really bad day, and they're cranky. But if you say, okay, if you knew this was the outcome, would you still do it? And they say yes,
yeah,
boom, right? It's huge. And that's where, coming from Franchise Business Review, which is one of my first, the company I was with before getting into development, that was my favorite question on the franchisee satisfaction survey, was that, so, you can complain all you want, but would you do it all over again? And they say yes, there's a reason for that, right?
yeah,
So asking more strategic questions is really important. Asking questions that, whether they're following the system, so they
yeah,
have to be coached a little bit of what types of questions, so that you can hear, is this franchisee following the system, and if so, are they succeeding, right? Because if you just call some rando and they're not following the system, you really have to take that with a grain of salt. Does that make sense, Josh?
yeah. No, those are some really great points, and I know the hour's starting to wrap down. I still want to get into Resting Rainbow, but kind of diving into that, as you are an emerging brand, and as you kind of mentioned how risk adverse you're willing to be. You have to be willing to be more risk adverse in an emerging brand. But one of the things I'm telling candidates, always evaluate the franchise developer just like you're evaluating them, and it says a lot that someone like yourself, who has been at well-established brands, to take that leap into an emerging brand. It says the confidence that someone that's been in the franchising space for well over a decade has the confidence. And one of the things you're always looking for is, a franchise developer being your support system. So someone that has lived, breathed it, knows how it works at a successful brand, and has the confidence to work at an emerging brand. I think that says a lot about the brand, and just something I wanted to bring up. So one of the things you brought up when you first started is that there's three things that typically a franchise would fail, one being the financials. Could you dive into what those other two things would be?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's one of the questions I get asked all the time. I haven't lately, but I used to all the time at home watch caregivers. So we already discussed one of the first ones, and they're not in any particular order, right? But the financial thing is super important. Don't go into it if you're not ready. And it's a lesson I learned, actually, where I even took a chance on a candidate, and we let them come in a little skinny, and they failed. Oh, that crushed my heart. I was like, from that point on, I was like, never again are we making an exception on financials. And I
Yeah,
never have since that point. Um, the second is, obviously, follow the system, right? Don't go rogue. I
yeah,
mean, you're joining a franchise for a reason. But I have I have some lots of different examples. One of them, even with that home watch caregivers, we award it. But this person was looking at another brand in senior care, and they did it a little bit different. And this gal tried to merge the two together
mhm,
and do it her way. So, at Home Watch, they require very small office space. It doesn't have to be next to Starbucks, right? It's not like a retail. Well, this person thought it should be a retail location. And before even opening, signed a lease for, I think it was like $7,000 a month. Like, they should have been having like a $1,500 a month rent. So
yeah,
before she even got her license, blew through all her working capital. So, follow the system. That is why you decide to get into franchising. And the
Mhm.
third one is whatever the system requires for employees and marketing,
Mm.
do it. Right? If it requires you to have 5 employees, you have to have those 5 employees. And when you start, because the first year we talk about is the hardest, right? And
Yeah.
you can start seeing your bank account going lower and lower and lower and lower. And people look at that and they freak out. And
Mm.
the first thing they cut is marketing.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
don't cut marketing. If anything, spend more on marketing. And it's like, it's so scary. But the franchisees that succeed are the ones that have had sleepless nights, but they push through and they push through and they push through and they don't cut back. So you cannot get rid of employees. You cannot cut your marketing. Like that's the whole purpose. So those are, in my opinion, the three big ones of why I've seen franchisees fail throughout my 17 years in franchise, almost 17 years in franchising. God, I'm old. I used to be little bitty like you.
I love it. And you're bringing up all these mentors, and now, in 10, 17 years, I'll be on calls bringing up you as my mentor. So that would be
Oh,
awesome.
that was so sweet.
But I love the fact that you brought up marketing, and marketing is really just about the number of people that know you. So if you're not investing into the marketing, more people aren't going to know you. It's pretty simple. And one kind of final question before getting into resting rainbow, because I think it's important as someone you've worked in a bunch of different opportunities between now we have a retail opportunity, you've done kind of home service and office space you mentioned. Obviously, it's all about kind of responsible growth, and some franchises may be more focused on selling, obviously, whereas some are more focused on awarding territories. Just like brokers, there's good and bad apples, so helping you focus on those good opportunities. And a retail franchise, a home-based franchise may grow at a different rate, and a lot of times people kind of talk about that 100 number, but candidates, as they're going through the process, they're looking at the growth of the franchise. How does someone evaluate the growth of a franchise first, kind of a home service franchise versus a retail franchise? Because retail franchise with operations, it may take longer to get operated. So are there kind of red flags where if you see retail opening like 200 stores all at once, that might be a trigger? So kind of evaluating, retail may be a slower growth rate versus home service, and maybe kind of evaluating those different decisions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I talk about when I do the FDD review, I talk about the item 20, right?
Yeah.
And not only talking about the growth, but the attrition, right? Look at when you do the math and figure out what percentage of attrition there is. Most people I think would agree with me, and it's just an opinion, but franchising has approximately a 90% success rate, right? So I tell people, I'm like, franchising is not a participation trophy sport. People
Yeah.
will lose, unfortunately. So you've got to look at what percentage are losing. And so I say you don't have to agree with me that 10% or less is normal, but that's my number. And you can come up with your own number. But look at the attrition, not just the growth, because if you're seeing more than 10% attrition year over year, that's a red flag. Find out what's going on. And they may have a really good reason, or they may not have a really good reason, right? But then
Mm.
when it looks at the growth parts, like, okay, well, how many were awarded and how many are open? What's that correlation? Because there are a lot of brands out there that will just like award 100 a year or more. And
Yeah.
like, okay, but how many are open? And there's historical points of systems that awarded, hundreds and now and only one or two open, and a huge lawsuit came out of it. So that could be a great question that a franchisee asks, a candidate ask a franchisor. Well, what's your goal? How many do you want to award, and what percentage of those get open every year, etc.
Yeah.
So and not only that is, do they have the support team in place for all of those? So when I met one of the co-founders of Resting Rainbow, it's my very first phone call. I had him and one of the co-founders and an investor on the phone, and that was one of my very first questions. I said, "How many do you want to award in 2024?"
Mm.
And the investor said 100. I said, "I'm out." And the co-founder was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." Whoa, 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 whoa. What do you? And I was like, "There's no way you guys are ready to." I'm like, "Could it? I award 100? Absolutely. Will I award 100? Absolutely not,
Yeah.
because you are not ready to open those up. What's that time frame of how you open them? So I asked them, how long does it take to open one, right? And it has a lot because this brand has EPA standards and stuff. Like, okay, so what support staff do you have in place? And they didn't. So I was like, no, that's irresponsible. So I think you have to, if these franchisors can award a bunch of territories and get them open quickly, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Absolutely
Okay.
nothing wrong with that. But if the average time to open up a location is 9 months,
Mhm.
ooh, you're taking a lot of people's money, and a lot of people that are awarding these don't actually even work for the brand,
Yeah.
right? So that's something to consider as well. Nothing against FSOs, is there's great FSOs, there's some bad FSOs and stuff like that, but there
Mhm.
sometimes is a correlation to that, right?
Yeah.
So again, I believe in responsible franchise growth, and they just need to look at what that percentage is. And it's going to be an opinion. Everyone's, again, going back to risk adversity. Some people are going to be okay with that, and some people are not going to be okay with that.
Mhm.
So it's not really a right or a wrong answer. Maybe there is a right and a wrong answer, but I ain't going to say it.
No, that's really awesome, Jamie, and I like the point where you were at the meeting and you said, no, you weren't gonna do that, and just the idea we've kind of mentioned there's good and bad apples, and, if you're gonna just do a random Google search, you have no idea whose hands you're gonna end up in, what franchise you're gonna look at, and the Google searches, I've done them myself, they're very biased what direction they're gonna tilt you towards, whereas, you can meet with someone like myself where we're gonna help you focus your time on an opportunity like a resting rainbow, meeting with someone like Jamie who cares about your success, isn't worried about just an initial franchise fee, but really that 5, 10 year growth of the franchise and seeing someone succeed. And I kind of think it leads back to how the initial intro call starts with seeing your face, asking about your family, what your actual goals are, what your why is. So I think that's really important. So Jamie, you've been at a couple different opportunities and now you're at Resting Rainbow and you're here for a reason at an emerging brand. Can you walk someone through what the opportunity is with Resting Rainbow?
Yeah, it's really exciting. I was just I try not to say blown away because I say that all the time. But it was such an interesting concept to me. And because I have been doing this for so long, I feel like most candidates are looking for the same check boxes,
Yeah.
and this checks off a ton of them. It is, and I want to be very clear, this is a pet cremation franchise. And some people are like, oh, do you have a cremator? Yes, you will actually have a cremator, and you are cremating pets, dogs, cats, rabbits. Believe it or not, we just cremated Flipper from the 1960s
Okay.
TV show, the dolphin, Flipper the dolphin. So you're cremating all different types of pets.
Yeah.
And this is a wonderful thing to an extent because approximately 90% of people are choosing cremation over burial. And every single pet in someone's household is going to unfortunately die. It is an inevitable service that almost everybody who is a pet owner is going to need. But
Mhm.
here's the cool thing. Uh, there's almost there's barely any competition. There's only a little over 1,000 pet cremators in the entire country,
Wow.
but there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of vet clinics, which is going to be a franchisee's number one lead source for their pets. So
Mm.
when I get on that first call, the initial call, the intro, near the end, I share my screen and I bring up my mapping program. And I was like, this is the only competitor in town. And I show, and I was like, now let me show you how many vet clinics are. And it lights up like a Christmas tree. I'm like, they're all using this one person. Do you think there's a demand? Oh, yeah. And it gets people super excited. But it only takes 2 to 3 employees, unskilled laborers. I mean,
Yeah.
think about it. Nobody wants skilled laborers anymore. Nobody wants a
Wow.
lot of unskilled laborers, right? So 2 to 3 employees. It's Section 179 eligible. We are in the process of building a it's all this ink's not signed yet, but will be very soon. An exclusive partnership with the ASPCA. And what's really cool is that that equipment that you purchase is very heavy equipment for the investment.
Mm,
That cremator will last you over 30 plus years if you take care of it.
yeah.
And the margins are huge, 35.8%. So for the
Mm,
first 6 months of 23, we did just shy of, well, I'm going to just give an exact number so I don't get in trouble. $138,983 in EBITDA for the
mm,
first 6 months of 23. It's
wow.
huge, absolutely enormous. And that was only 23 is our only third year cremating pets with this brand.
Mm,
So in 22, it was our second year cremating pets, and we did a little over 180,000 in EBITDA.
mm,
So the money's there, the demand's there, and barely any selling needed. It's kind of a
yeah.
field of dreams thing. If you build it, they will come. There's
Yeah.
barely any selling. That's because it's needs based. So.
No, that's incredible, Jamie. And I know our time's winding down. And as I mentioned, we're going to need 100 different podcasts to kind of go over your career experiences. I have so many different questions. And even just on Resting Rainbow, I think that's awesome, where it's really a needs-based business, simplistic, multiple revenue streams, something that literally everyone needs. And lack of competition as well, only kind of like local mom and pops. And the barrier to entry is pretty difficult as well. So having the franchise, the systems in place is really powerful. And we didn't necessarily have the time, but it involves a hub and spoke business model, similar to Lapels Cleaners earlier and Dunkin' Donuts as well. So some very strong, powerful franchise systems have this model where it allows you to very easily scale. Where some people may be hesitant on retail, but it gives you an easier barrier to entry to get involved, and then you can scale that, and then you have all these assets that you build up. So I think that's very powerful. And one kind of final question, or two maybe final questions very quickly, kind of want to dive into the ideal candidate real quickly, because you kind of mentioned it's a crematorium. So is the franchise owner physically going to be doing that? What is the franchise owner looking for? I know you mentioned earlier kind of the multi-unit, the Amazon owners. What does that candidate look like?
Yep, so they can be owner operator or semi-absentee. We even allow absentee model here. So they don't have to do the actual cremation. They can hire an employee a technician to do the processing of the pets. So if they don't want to touch animals, that is fine. But they've
Yeah.
got to be okay to be around them at the end of the day, because that's what the brand is. It's taking care of deceased animals. But they don't have to do that. They don't even have to deal with the sad side of it, because I call this the ick factor. People are, they don't like the idea it's going to be sad and, these things, but you can hire for those things. The
Mhm.
ideal owner is somebody that really gets that concept, like, oh my gosh, this demand is huge. There's very little competition. And they have the ability to either be owner operator and run it, or the ability to have management skills to hire a office manager, full-time office manager, and just manage that person, right? A franchisee needs to be able to, of course, manage their trust and respect in the community, that reputation. They've got to be able to manage their very small staff,
Mhm.
manage their marketing efforts with the veterinarian clinics and in the community, and of course, manage their money.
Yeah.
But the candidates that I'm loving the most are definitely people that have already owned multiple businesses and see the simplicity here. But it's early, Josh. We don't know yet, right? We have a franchisee, my first franchisee that I've awarded signing today, actually at Yup, and they're purchasing two territories in Florida, Sarasota and Bradenton, and they are going to be owner operator, and they're really pumped. They have pets, they have a child. Definitely not who I would have thought,
Yeah.
but they're perfect. They get that community feel, and they like the idea that they're going to be helping people in their time of need of their pets passing, that type of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. It's just a very simple business model, very, very different models to get involved, participation types, needs-based business. I think it's a very attractive business. Jamie, I'm very grateful for your time, the full 60 minutes on the Conquer the Mind podcast. I had a great time. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave people with?
Thank you. I think the final thought I'll have if you're a candidate is my advice is ask the hard questions first.
Yeah.
Ask them straight up, what's the hardest part of this model? On the very first call, ask that. Now, I don't get asked that all the time, but I tell them. I always tell new franchise development people lead with the bad, end with the good. If
Mm,
you lead with the bad, or if you ask the bad first, find out what the hardest part is first, then it you build trust and respect immediately. And if you can look at that hardest part and see that ability to overcome it, then the rest is gravy, right?
yeah.
So ask the hard questions right away. Or as a candidate or as a friend dev person, lead with the bad.
No, that's awesome, Jamie. I love that advice. And I think just like anything, whether it's a 9 to 5 business ownership, there's going to be pros and cons. So just being able to kind of weigh it and figuring out, in 3 to 5 years, is that going to get you to that why, to those goals? So I think that's really great advice. And just wrapping it up on some of my final thoughts and takeaways from the podcast today is, one thing that I think is really important for candidates during the validation process is asking people, would you do this again? Would you make that same investment again? Because you can ask a million different questions, but I think that's probably the most powerful question in terms of what you're looking to get. Is this worth my money as well? And then I liked as well how you brought up mentors a lot during the call, and I'm very big on mentorship, and it just fast tracks your process wherever you want to get in life. So I think franchising allows you to have that mentor by your side, whether it's other franchisees or the franchisor. You have these mentors by your side, and very rarely in life are you going to be in a job, in a career where other people also want to see you succeed and grow. So I think that's very powerful. And well, the final takeaway for me was some of your mentors, and some of the things they said is, the most important thing being actions. You can listen to a broker, you can listen to a franchise developer say all these different things, but when you validate it, you see the people that have done it, lived it, taken that action, that's where you get the full validation, and where things really come full circle. So I think, I learned a ton today. I think the viewers will learn a ton as well. Jamie of Resting Rainbow, I think the candidates, potential franchise owners are going to learn a lot today. And I'm excited to, we'll definitely have to have a second episode as well. So thank you, Jamie, for your time today.
It was great working with you today, and two Frenchies on a podcast. Yeah, I wonder if people will count how many times we waved our hands all over the place.
Yeah, it's a little workout, so it's good while you're sitting down for me.
Exactly. I've got crazy arm muscles now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie. I appreciate
Thank
everyone today.
you.
Like, comment, subscribe, share, help out the algorithm. I appreciate everyone today.
Bye, John.